on, everybody? Sitting here hanging out, a nice fire in the evening time. It's the end of August. Today was a little cooler. You can feel that the fall is coming our way. But anyways, today I wanted to actually talk about my 3 favorite survival stories, real life survival stories. There are so many, countless different stories and situations that people defied the odds and somehow managed to survive under the worst conditions. So I'm going to talk about my 3 favorites. My favorite wilderness survival story was the story of the rugby players who were flying towards Uruguay and they crashed in the Andes Mountains somewhere in Argentina. And I cannot comprehend how these people were able to survive. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the story, and you probably immediately think about the cannibals, and that's of course a part of the story that you have to be able to talk about. You know, they would not have been able to survive unless they made that horrible decision. They would have perished. But it wasn't just that actually had them survive. They would have perished if it wasn't for 2 people, Nando, and I think it was Nando and Carlito or Carlos? Roberto Canessa and Nando Perado, I believe. Forgive me if I said their names wrong. But they actually knew that the only way that they could survive is that they had to find a way out. And the only thing they knew is that towards the west was the Green Mountains of Chile. That was a fact. They didn't know anything else as far as where they were, how far they were from things. So with minimal gear that people nowadays wear full gear, and they wouldn't even be able to do this trek that they actually accomplished with basically almost nothing. They managed to climb peak over peak over peak, and then through this long mountain valley. They were so weak, they were starving, they were malnourished, they were in pain. They somehow managed to survive the nights and survive all of the scary, unsafe situations, and they managed to actually rescue the rest of the survivors that were over on the plain. They were so surprised, actually, when they were rescued. The search team and the authorities, they actually thought that Nando must have been mistaken when he broke out the map and he actually showed them where they were. They didn't believe him. They didn't think it was humanly possible for them to actually make it out of there. So Nando got into the chopper with them. They took the helicopter and they flew over and they found where the other survivors were, and they made it home. There was a lot of controversy because of how they had to cannibalize in order to survive, but the resilience, the persistence, and the hope that they managed to have in that situation, and many of them are alive today. So it's my favorite wilderness survival story. I remember watching the movie based on a true story when I was 7 years old, and that actually got me interested in wilderness survival. That movie, that story, actually started to light the fire of my passion for wilderness survival. So, fantastic story. I recommend. There's a couple books on the topic, as well as the old school movie with Ethan Hawke. It's kind of a little cheesy, but at the same time, it's filmed pretty well. Another amazing story was the story of Aron Ralston back in 2003 in Utah. He was a very experienced adventurer. He had done this a million times. He loved exploring caves and different areas with boulders and just mesmerizing, beautiful places. And it was a little risky. He went out, didn't tell anybody where he was going to be, and he ended up getting trapped. A boulder fell and it pinned his arm. He was trapped down in like a little cave, little whatever area. Was afraid that if it rained, you'd get flash floods and he could drown. No one knew where he was. No one could hear him. He was very far away from help. His arms pinned. He has no idea what to do. You guys have probably seen the movie 127 hours or 128 hours. I forget how many hours, with James Franco in it. It's actually a pretty good flick. But what he had to do to survive, many people would not have been able to do. I don't know if I would have been able to do it. Granted, he was there and he knew it was the only way that he could survive. He had to cut his arm off. Not with a nice sharp samurai sword or something that would cause minimal pain. He had just like a cheap Walmart crappy little knife, and he had to cut himself. Cut his arm off. And then he had to walk miles to safety with a cut off arm. Again, many people would not be able to do that. And until you're in that situation, which most people are never going to be in that situation, you don't actually know what you would do. Would you actually amputate your arm? It's incomprehensible sometimes to think about the pain and how intense that was. So Aron Ralston, that story is definitely one of my favorite survival stories. Then there's the story of Joe Simpson and Simon Yates. They were mountain climbers in the Peruvian Andes. They were climbing, having a great time, but then it became very, very, very difficult. They got stuck in a storm in a horrifying spot. They were literally like on a rock face. It was terrifying, and things just got worse. The man ended up breaking his leg. One of the guys broke his leg, and then one of the friends helps the other down the mountain with a broken leg. And then something happens where the guy's about to fall down a crevasse. He's hanging by the rope, and his friend, I apologize that I don't know which one got in the situation, which one was holding the rope, but his friend actually had to cut the rope because there was nothing else he could do. And so he figured that his friend died because the guy fell down a crevasse. So the guy who survived ended up going back down the mountain, and he was terrified and figured that his friend was dead. But the guy survived, actually. He was down in a crevasse and managed to be on this little ledge. He's got a broken leg. He is in so much pain, and he managed to somehow actually climb out of this friggin' crevasse and then crawl all the way down the mountain, and surprised his friend when his friend was down at the camp, and he heard his friend yelling for him. It was such an amazing survival story. I mean, the odds of surviving something like that is slim to none. And the guy managed to survive having a broken leg, falling in a crevasse, climbing out of it, and then going back down the mountain. There was an episode on I Shouldn't Be Alive that talked about that story, as well as there's books and a lot of information about that disaster. So that was a intense wilderness survival story. And oh, there's my doggie, she's walking by. So anyways, I want to thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I look forward to making the next video.